All right, babies, we're back. And the last subchapter of chapter six, which is basically strategy analysis. Now, chapter six is about strategy analysis. What we've done so far is analyze current state, define future state, assess the risks, and now we're going to define change strategy. So ultimately, everything we've been doing is for defined change strategy. What's the purpose of defining change strategy? The purpose of defining change strategy is to develop and assess alternative approaches to the change and then select the recommended approach. Right? So description, developing the change strategy is simpler when the current state and future state are already defined because they provide some context for the change. That's why we did them first. The change strategy clearly describes the nature of the change in terms of context of change, identified alternative change strategies, justification of why a particular change strategy is the best approach, investment and resources required to work towards the future state, how the enterprise will realize value after the solution is delivered, and the key stakeholders in the change and the transition states along the way. So really is encompassing everything we've like talked to and everything we've looked at. We're encompassing it in this part, which is funny because like I'm actually excited to see like what are the other like chapters that we're gonna go for. But that's fun. So the appropriate representation of a change strategy depends on the perspective of the change team and their stakeholders. Okay, so like they're telling us like the strategy is based on whoever's working on it. The change strategy might be presented as part of a business case, statement of work, SOW, and enterprise's strategic plan or in other formats. So we get to decide how we actually present it. It could be literally just like bullet points on a fucking page, or on a fucking bullet points on a fucking like binder, maybe I don't know. Defining a change strategy usually involves identifying several strategies and ultimate selecting the strategy that is most appropriate for the situation. Change strategies can entail attaining only parts of the future state initially and therefore include only some components on a complete solution for each transition state along the path to reaching the future state. So here basically like what we're doing is the strategy is going towards something. So ultimately like we get pieces of the future state and then we basically look at the current state and then slowly kind of like create that road back and forth in order for us to kind of like meet somewhere where the future state actually, so think about it as we have all this information now and we're going somewhere. So basically all this information has to kind of like come to these dots where they expand and then meet again and eventually kind of like reach to the future state. Yeah, I should have had charts or something. For each transition state along the path, basically, to reaching the future state, the change strategy should clarify which parts of the solution are completed and which are not. So ultimately, like every one of those transition states is probably like contributing to something, right? Because as we're moving forward, we at one point when we're deciding like basically this when we were working on the requirements management lifecycle, we were looking at dependencies and all that kinds of stuff. And we were considering like where do they fit, where would we need them, and how they would actually like impact us. So ultimately, with the change strategy, you're kind of like pointing, we're going from A to Z, and we're going to go through B, C, D, E, F, G. And every time we're moving forward, when we reach A, we've achieved this. When we reach B, we've achieved this. So what are the inputs? The current state description provides context about the current state. Future state description provides context about the future state. Risk analysis results, we just finished these, and stakeholder engagement approach because we're dealing with people. And here's a diagram about it. The guidelines and tools are business analysis approach, design options, and solution recommendations. Whilst the output is used in change strategy and solution scope, these are the two outputs. The solution scope and the change strategy. This is like a clear identification of how far we're willing to go with what we have or how far we can go with what we have and we're able to kind of like achieve within the actual time frame and whatever like parameters that we placed for ourselves. So what are the tasks using these outputs? Stakeholder engagement, prioritizing requirements, assess requirements, approve requirements, risk analysis, blah, 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 blah. Lots of stuff. We're going to read about them at the bottom. What are the elements? Solution scope. The solution of this outcome changes the flows of the enterprise to satisfy a need. We discussed that in 6.3.3.4. And the solution scope defines the boundaries of the solution and is described through detail to enable stakeholders to understand which capabilities and change will deliver. It also describes how to propose solution enables the future state's goals, and solution scope might evolve through the initiative and more information discovered. So ultimately, the elements of this is basically the pieces that fit to actually make sure that we are actually talking about the strategy. And the solution scope is literally just an explanation of everything that we need in order for this to achieve, and what does it look like, if anything, to us, to others, to whatever. The solution scope might describe in different ways, including the use of capabilities, functions, locations, technology, business rules, networks, business decisions, organizational structures, data, workflows, processes, events, resources, sequences, knowledge and skills, motivations, or models, and description of markets and business logic. I did all of these in one breath. So good stuff. The solution scope can also include descriptions of out-of-scope solution components to provide clarity. So all of these knowledge and skills, resources, processes, data, workflows, events, all of these could actually be like the scope of what are we achieving, where are we reaching. Gap analysis is basically where we are and where we're going to be and the difference in between. So gap analysis identifies the difference between current state and future state. To perform gap analysis, both current state and future state should be defined using the same techniques to describe both current state and future states. Assist in gap analysis as it simplifies the comparison. Gap analysis will help identify the gaps that prevent the enterprise from meeting needs and achieving goals. It can be used to determine if the enterprise can meet the needs using the existing structure, resources capable, and technology of the enterprise. Can, like, whatever resources we have, everything we can do in order to actually like get to that. If the enterprise can meet the needs of the current state of capabilities, then the change will likely be relatively small. If we can't meet the needs, the gap analysis kind of like creates a structure for what we have and what we're missing, probably. And so the capabilities analyzed in gap analysis include processes, staff competencies, functions, knowledge and skills, lines of business, training, organized structures, facilities, locations, application systems, and data and information, technology, infrastructure. The gaps will need to be addressed in the transition and future states. So what effectively we're doing is we're finding the gaps and we're addressing them as part of our strategy. So our strategy is how to address the gaps. With the gap analysis, you're kind of like pointing at one about the future and right now and seeing the differences in multiple things. Like for example, right now I have short hair, in the future I have long hair. So with that, basically, there's the gap, and what happens in between is where the strategy kind of like fills in the details that move forward. So business analysis analyzes the enterprise to assess its capacity to make the change and to sustain the change in the future state. The readiness assessment considers the enterprise's capacity. So like the assessment of readiness is like, what are we capable of doing? And but to use and sustain a solution, the realized value from the solution. So ultimately, we're also considering like, even if we achieve the solution that we want, are we able to sustain it and maintain it? The assessment also factors in the cultural readiness for the stakeholders. It includes if the people are involved in like that solution or that change or something like this. The timeline as well, and the resources available. A change strategy, which is basically the high-level plan of key activities, the events that will be used to transform the enterprise from the current state and the future state. I think, well, this is the chapter for change strategy. Change strategies may be a singular initiative composed of smaller changes, which might be structured as a set of sequence of projects. So a change strategy is not one thing leading to another. It probably could be multiple things in smaller projects or whatever it is. Or various continuous improvement efforts. Each element of change might not completely address the need, so multiple changes might be necessary. So during the course of the development of the change strategy, several options are identified, explored, described through the detail. Like, again, like we're always aware of what's going on around us, and determining detail and described in enough detail to determine which options are feasible. Alternatives can be identified through brainstorming and consulting. Subject matter experts, sources, ideas. Those are basically the people's, the stakeholders of whatever it is that we're doing. Stakeholders. The deferred change strategy is selected from this set of options and developed in more detail. The preferred change strategy should be selected considering. So when we're selecting a change strategy, we're going to consider the organizational readiness to make change, major costs and investment needed to make change, timelines to make change, alignment of the business objectives, timelines and value realization, opportunity costs of the change strategy. Like these are the things that we actually consider with the solution scope, with the need, with the research that we do, with the stakeholders and how we talk to them. We can almost consider these everywhere, like time, alignment with the objectives, value, opportunity costs. organizational readiness, major cost investment needed, cash, all that good stuff. Business analysis may develop a business case for each potential change strategy to support decision making. Like we actually could like, because maybe we choose to kind of like deliver the full project on smaller series of projects. So basically every single one of them kind of like requires a change strategy maybe. And the opportunity cost of each change strategy also needed to be considered. Opportunity cost refers to the, so a change strategy is like the smaller things that lead to the big things in a strategic presence, right? Like we're actually placing them in a way that could be translated to other people. And so when defining change strategy, the investment to make the change to the future state is also considered. The net benefits of a future state may be very high, but if the investment is unbearable, they just can't afford the change. The So ultimately, like when you're making a change strategy, it could very much be like fuck off. Like you did your job, but we're not going to do it. So you basically like did enough for you to consider what the project will entail, and then you were like, no, it's not going to happen. So the potential value, including the details of the expected benefit and cost, are key components of making a business case for the change. Relating descriptions of potential value to measure the actual value currently being achieved enables stakeholders to understand the expected change in value. While every change facilitated, like every single thing that's impacted has to be written down. Transition states and release planning. In many cases, the future state will need to be achieved over time rather than through a single change. Yes, meaning that the enterprise will have to operate in one or more transition states. Releasing planning is concerned with determining which requirements to include in each release phase or iteration of the change. Business analysts help facilitate release planning discussions to help stakeholders. So basically, how are you going to release the actual plan, and how are you going to like incorporate the people that are necessary for it, and the factors that consider that guide this decision, such as overall budget, deadlines, time constraints, resource constraints, training schedules, and ability of the business. So you're planning the change strategy is different than planning how the change strategy is applied, and it's different than how the change strategy is actually released. Like you're literally using Lego blocks. It's like do this now with this person and this, and other side does this, and then eventually you incorporate other people or you release more of the plan potentially, so it's not really confusing. There may be organizational restraints or policies that must be adhered to in any implementation. Like always keep in mind, these kinds of things are always around us. Business analysts assist in planning the timing of the implementation in order to cause minimal disruption of business activities and to ensure all parties understand the impact of the organization. What are the guidelines and tools? Business analysis approach, design options, and solution recommendations. And these are the ones that we actually kind of like use in order to kind of like pick the plan. Business analysis approach is basically how we do things, and design options are like describes various ways to satisfy the business needs. Techniques, balanced scorecard, benchmarking the market analysis, brainstorming, business capability analysis, business cases, business model canvases, decision analysis, estimation, financial analysis, focus groups, functional decomposition interviews, lessons learned, mind mapping, organizational modeling, process modeling, scope modeling, SWOT analysis, vendor assessment, and workshops. It's a lot of stuff, man. But don't worry, we're getting to them in chapter 10. There's literally like 100 plus pages on just the tools that we could use. And who are the stakeholders? There are customers, domain expert matter, end user, implementation subject matter, operational support, project manager, regulator, sponsor, supplier, and a tester. And ultimately, the outputs are change strategy and solution scope. So here, like I'm just going to read the tester to see if it's any different from the previous things that the testers do, but they're responsible for ensuring that the change will function within acceptable parameters, accomplish the desired result, and deliver solutions that meet an appropriate level of quality. It's exactly the same thing. That what are we testing? We're testing basically what we're producing. And so with every single one of these, basically like documents that we're creating, what we're doing is we're basically like checking with the people that are involved. And what are the outputs? The outputs are the change strategy and a full solution scope. The solution scope that will be achieved through execution of the change strategy and the approach that the organization will follow to guide that change. And here we go. We're done with this, and next time we're at chapter 7. Fuck yeah, babies.